Hello, this is Tzipora Nefesh, Program Coordinator with the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, United Way of Central New Mexico. The Collaborative Decision-Making webinar will start in just a moment. I would like to say special thanks to U.S. Bank for sponsoring this webinar. And I am pleased to introduce Mark Bennett, Decision Resources, Inc. Mark is a professional mediator and organization consultant who has worked with local, regional, and international nonprofit organizations to help them build cultures of collaboration.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your interest in this webinar. I look forward to sharing the lessons I've learned about decision-making and collaboration with you during our 45 minutes to an hour together. I welcome your questions during the presentation and in the time that we've saved at the end. So we need to start with something fundamental. Life is a decision-making journey. Each one of you navigates the world through decisions. Collaboration and the work of people together is no different. Collaborations are led, guided, and defined by decisions that are ethical, credible, and effective every day in every key decision. Our values move us from philosophy into practical action through key decisions that demonstrate what's important to us in the choices we make. When these decisions are made well, they're more likely to take you and the collaboration that you're a part of in the direction and toward the destination that you want to go. It will enable this examination if you have in mind a specific decision or decisions that you can use as a personal reference point, decisions that you're very familiar with, whether you played the role of a participant, a decision maker, or an observer. Perhaps you might think about decisions that could have been made better as you consider the lessons that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Let's begin by returning to the definition of collaboration from the first session. Obviously, we're talking about people coming together as individuals, in groups, or formally in organizations. But the essence of collaboration is to be able to reach for and achieve something together that isn't possible while remaining separately organized and working. In order for us to begin our examination of decision-making, we need to think about this possibility of something new emerging amidst the essential characteristics of collaboration. So I want to summarize them briefly. First, there is a need for and a sense of interdependence. So related to decisions, we have to believe and sense that these decisions matter to all of us, that we're all focused on and concerned about decisions. Second, there is an imperative to bring people with different views, different backgrounds, different interests together, and to make room for these differences at the decision-making table through inclusion. The third is decisions, whether made by an individual or made in a group or a committee, fundamentally need to generate amidst the other people concerned and involved and affected a sense of consensus agreement. It may not be a formal consensus, but broadly speaking, most people are supporting what's happening and the decisions are being made. Finally, there's a sense of shared responsibility. And that means that decisions are everybody's business, even when the authority or responsibility for them formally is more narrowly held. So there are several roles: the decision maker, the consultant or advisor providing input, or people who are making recommendations to others, like a board of directors who may have to formally adopt them, or a follower seeking clarity and needing to implement a decision. These are all part of the shared effort to make decisions work within a collaborative setting. I want to mention one more thing, and that is over time there is a sense of how decisions are made that is predictable and it's seen as constructive and positive within the organization. We can't have a sense in a healthy collaboration that decisions are made behind closed doors, that people don't have input into or understanding of how they were made. So once we're aware of these elements, then we come back to the understanding that good creative collaboration is based on cornerstone practices, that these practices guide the organization on a predictable path towards a successful result. The two practices that we're going to focus on today are the foundational practice of dialogue and what I call values-based decision-making, or values in action. Previously, we talked about collaborative negotiation in the last webinar, and in the final webinar we'll be talking about wise planning. Credible decisions reflect honest dialogue among different perspectives and are guided by important values. Now let's consider what qualities a decision needs to begin to earn support and be credible in the eyes of others. Too often, the word ethics is used directly or indirectly to mean what is not illegal or wrong, in violation of regulation or policy. The true meaning of ethics is not focused on legality, but it goes beyond compliance to thinking about what is right and good to do. Think of making ethical decisions as decision-making quality, that is to say, a good decision. Healthy collaborations raise the bar beyond compliance to what is positive, principled, and practical. That is, what is good to do in this situation. This happens, and it really only happens, through a robust dialogue that can engage differing views. Too often, decisions do not include diverse perspectives and honest reflection, and this can lead, unfortunately, to the repair shop. In considering this journey of decision-making, you can think of a decision as a vehicle designed to take you to your goal. When decisions do not deliver desired results or lead to costs and consequences that outweigh the benefits, it can be expensive, difficult, and time-intensive for the organization to work with. So making decisions right, making them well the first time, is what we're going to be looking at today, and the specific ways that you can help your collaboration do it better the first time. Leaders and other people in positions of responsibility to make decisions produce or manufacture these decisions, and a well-manufactured decision lasts. It takes you down the road in the direction you want to go. But the wheels fall off too many decisions because there's inadequate attention to the needs and concerns of stakeholders. So decision quality begins and ends with fair and reasoned consideration of the people who have a stake in this decision. In order to understand a decision, it is important to segment the audience of stakeholders. It's usually pretty easy for us to consider those who are most likely to naturally support something, or who are maybe likely to be critical of it based on our prior experience with them and our knowledge of how their concerns are reflected in this decision. However, there may be a larger group whose response to the decision depends upon the way the decision is made and communicated. It's this group that should be categorized. They're not automatically aligned. We have to think about who they are and what their concerns are. The beneficiaries may be people that we're thinking about directly, but they're often beneficiaries over the long term. They're not necessarily going to directly benefit. Who are they? What do they care about? How about the people who are going to be impacted one way or another about this decision? The people who are going to have to implement it, those who may lose in some way by the decision, it may cost them something. The employees of the organization, as a general class, are always stakeholders in organizational decision making. but often in complicated decisions, we need to break the employees down into groups. There may be the people who are in different categories. I work in a number of nonprofit healthcare organizations where we have to think about physicians, nurses, janitorial and administrative staff. There are a variety of categories of employee who may have very different interests. In the nonprofit world, the people who are funding or sponsoring this effort are stakeholders. And finally, there's a broader set of community stakeholders, perhaps people in the media and others in the community who are going to be review or interested in this decision in some way. All need their fair and reasoned consideration. There may be direct links between the stakeholder and the decision, but having a stake means having some reason to be interested or concerned. The communication of a good decision anticipates these concerns and addresses them candidly and honestly. This kind of communication is no accident. It begins from the very start of the decision-making process, and we build it in to the process of making the decision. You build a strong decision like you would build a pyramid. It's got 3 dimensions. You design in the integrity into each dimension by considering, first of all, if you have a complete enough understanding of what the decision is about, who it touches, and what they care about. You were comprehensive in considering the range of what was important, not just to you as a decision maker, but to others who have a stake. Second, the decision has a sound connection between key guiding values and the option that has been chosen. So there's a sense of this alignment and connectedness between principle and the decision itself. The third is that the decision has a quality of authenticity because you communicated with people with transparency. People understand why the decision was made and how it was arrived at. Like the 3 dimensions of a stable pyramid, each of these 3 decisions is capacitated by a commitment. You want to have a complete understanding of who all the stakeholders are. You want to make a sound connection, as I said, between these guiding values and the choice, and you want to honestly, finally consider multiple perspectives, have an open dialogue within the decision-making process, and explain the real reasons to others, while acknowledging the downside, consequences, and costs of the decision. You need to be intentional to build this kind of decision as you prepare to face 5 challenges rooted in the reality of every difficult decision. Let's use a difficult decision within an existing collaboration that can illustrate each challenge. I want you to think of a large, complex, nonprofit healthcare organization that delivers multiple services in the community, meets a remarkable wide range of needs in the community. So this is an organization that faced a critical choice because one of their most important and long-standing programs had run into financial difficulties. They could not replace the missing funds with other sources of funding after diligent and creative effort, and they were having to draw from the other existing program areas and weaken them in order to continue to sustain this program. This created incredible conflict in the organization. There were strong loyalties around all the existing programs. There were community groups who were dependent on each of the programs, and there was a deep concern that something had to be done other than continuing to fund one program out of the budgets and resources of others that were also meritorious. So this decision came to a head and involved a range of people who had to come into a room and work through this very difficult choice about whether to close a long-standing, very valuable program in order to save and protect other very valuable programs. So the first challenge of decision-making is the engagement of differing views. Everyone has a point of view that they bring, perhaps based on their interests, perhaps based on their experience, their education, their training. We have to acknowledge that that's always the start of making a difficult decision. The beginning of wisdom is an admission that each of us has a limited perspective or lens. However, we can use the perspectives of others to focus our lens and improve our perspective. A good decision-making process grapples with the reality of multiple limited points of view and engages them through dialogue to see more clearly. In this case, it took weeks to get the right number of people in a room who adequately could represent the diverse stakeholders around this issue and the different people within the organization with their divergent viewpoints. That was the start, to acknowledge all the different points of view and bring people in who could adequately represent them. So once multiple perspectives are engaged, you need to focus more deeply where the second challenge awaits. The second challenge is to understand significance. Values drive all choices. Important decisions cannot and will not be made without values at play that will cause people to move towards or away from various options. It's important to have a simple, workable definition of values. Simply stated, values are what matters to stakeholders. It's their why that underlies what they care about. It's clear from the dramatic developments in neuroscience that the way the brain functions when we make decisions, none of us can decide without the emotional input of what we care about. The body of evidence about the critical function that the feeling, caring, valuing process plays is compelling. When the areas of the brain that process emotion are damaged, our capacity to decide is impaired. Literally, we can't choose between oatmeal and cornflakes. This emotion-laden thinking process is essentially involved in the discussion of and the making of good decisions. In the example that I've mentioned to you, there were 25 people sitting in a room representing all the different sides of this important programmatic choice. Around the room, in the exterior, there were 12 board members of the nonprofit organization who were going to have to make the decision. Their job was to listen and listen carefully to all the different perspectives. I was sitting in the middle of the room with the 25 people facilitating a discussion. And the discussion began after we acknowledged the different points of view, the first challenge, to begin to ask people to speak directly to the values that were important to them in the making of this decision. So once there's plain speaking, and there was a lot of plain speaking in this room, often delivered with incredible passion about what stakeholders care about and why, you're now in a position to grapple with the third decision-making challenge. The third challenge is the tension between competing goods, what I call right versus right dilemmas. These are the most common tough choice that collaborations face. We don't face ethical challenges between right and wrong. We face challenges between things that are all good, that are in tension with each other, and you cannot do them all. Choices have to be made. Here in the decision I'm mentioning, it was very clear that the program that was up on for consideration had many virtues and good things about it. But the reality of their ongoing budget crisis and its effect on other good programs could no longer be ignored. There was no win-win. There was no way for them to just find a funder and imagine and invent their way out of the dilemma. That is the reality they'd been living with for years. They had done and tried everything that they could in order to save the program in terms of the resources it needed to continue on. It's essential to the integrity of the collaborative effort that these right versus right dilemmas are resolved based on principle, not power, politics, or personality. Anything other than principled resolution weakens the very fabric of the collaborative effort. So the fourth challenge is the clear affirmation of certain guiding values that justify a difficult choice. when you can't do everything that you'd like to do, when you can't please everyone that you'd like to make happy and satisfy, on what principled basis do you make a choice that is going to disappoint some and perhaps impact them in a significant way? Decisions that incorporate and make visible the values that guide and animate the decision are more likely to be strong enough to move forward toward the desired purpose and benefits. They can withstand the winds of disappointment and resistance. For the decision maker also, the clear reflective presence of priority values offers that individual or the group making a tough choice the strength of their conviction that they have based the best decision that they could on clear principles to stand firm and stay the course. It also offers stakeholders, even when they're disposed to be critical, a way to respectfully agree to disagree, instead of making the decision a mountain they're willing to die on. In the case that I'm mentioning to you, the decision that was made was very disappointing to people in the community and people within the organization. However, there was an interesting moving forward that happened within the organization afterwards, where people acknowledged the difficult circumstances, recognized that the board had made their decision after a full and fair hearing and examination of the pros and cons and the possibilities. And there was, along with the dissatisfaction and the disappointment, the ability to move forward. So when you know what guiding stars you're going to follow, what guiding values you're resting on, then you have the opportunity to turn towards your options and grapple with the fifth challenge of a right versus right difficult decision. So the last challenge involves the need to deal with the inevitable downside of the decision. Otherwise, it isn't difficult. You must address the necessary consequences that will rest somewhere with someone. Regret, sacrifice, and cost require consideration and acknowledgement and truth-telling before making a final decision. This downside typically comes in one of three forms. The first is that it's going to cost the decision maker something. The second is it's going to cost others something. And the third is it's going to cost in the form of injury to a value or principle that matters. In the case that I'm mentioning, the groups in the community that were being served by this program were vulnerable and in great need of the services that the program was delivering. There was a sense in the values of the organization that there had been great loyalty to this program over the years and loyalty to the people who were benefiting and in need. So the decision to potentially close this program had a real sense of loss at the values level. There's the tangible loss to the people who have the need, but what about people within the organization who believe in the organization's mission as it relates to serving this population? That's a significant downside. When the downside is not acknowledged, it leaves the stakeholder audience an obvious gap in the story of the decision to fill in. Were the decision makers sloppy? Did they not take the time to think about this? I.e., were they incompetent? Were the decision makers indifferent? Did they just not even care about what this decision was going to do? That is, were they callous? Or do they think we're so stupid they won't even recognize what's happening with this decision that we're going to notice? They don't think we're paying attention. That is, that they have almost a malevolent orientation towards us. None of those kinds of stories are flattering and helpful to the ongoing credibility of a collaborative effort. So it's fundamentally important that all these challenges are dealt with so that decision makers can give a credible account of the real story of the decision. So now I want to show you a straightforward approach that you can use in any key decision within your collaboration to help it face all the challenges that I've just mentioned to you and make a difficult decision with integrity. This approach is practical. I've had the opportunity to use it for the last 15 years in settings at the local, the national, and the international level, challenging decisions by nonprofits of all sizes and shapes. So I offer it to you with that confidence that it works and it can deliver a constructive outcome to the most difficult decision-making process. So we're going to design in the integrity into the process and the outcome that you want of a good, credible decision by stopping 5 times along a road on the way to that choice that needs to be made. The road is paved with dialogue. It's the only way to really bring the lights on and make sure that all the aspects of a difficult decision are considered and given due thought. So the first thing is we have to immediately address that first challenge and make room for the different perspectives that need to be there at the table, and make sure that we give some time to acknowledge them and respect them. Then we can dive deep into the layer of importance in any key decision, finding out what matters to people. Then, after understanding the range of importance, you have to come to grips with the question of priority. When you've done that, when you've laid a good groundwork of perspective and importance, you've founded the bottom part of the pyramid. You've got a sense of the completeness of the problem, the 360-degree view of what matters here. What happens with priority is that once you know what's most important to you and you've aligned it with a choice, you've begun to create that soundness of connection between principle and possibility. And then when you've done that, you have to connect back to the stakeholder audience and make sure that they understand what you were thinking, why you were thinking it, and understanding also with the downside that you can recognize how it relates to them. So that builds the authenticity of the decision. It gives you those 3 sides of the integrity pyramid. We take each of these stops along the road and turn them into a step. I want you to think of it as an actionable orientation for each step. And then I'm going to tell you more about exactly how to choreograph that step. So without a process that keeps bringing people back to honest dialogue, a difficult, value-laden decision can easily degrade into a debate and cross the rumble strips on the road into a ditch. The people in the room that I was working with in the example I've given you had very strong feelings, and some of them came to this meeting spoiling for an argument and a fight. So part of the job of that kind of a forum is to continue to invite people back to what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature, not to give up their differences and their concerns, but to speak about them in a way that also opens the conversational and the learning link between them and the other people in the room, not just to recycle their familiar arguments with each other. So a practical approach refocuses this win-lose, debate-oriented behavior to win-learn dialogue. And this dialogue is critical. So the first step on the road at that stop is to clarify perspective, to check to see if people are clear on the different points of view that are represented at the table. The second step is to work on comprehension. Not only are people speaking about what matters, what the values are to different stakeholders, but we're listening to that in a way that we're growing our understanding of the complexity of the values terrain. The third action is commitment. What fundamentally important things need to be at the heart of the decision-making process amidst a range of things that all have some importance? The fourth is the act of choosing, to really consciously align the values that are your priority values with the best option that can reflect and fit with them. And finally, the connection happens between you and your stakeholder audience with really clear, thoughtful communication, what I called earlier telling the story of the decision. So all of this creates a motion forward in a difficult decision-making conversation to reach a good and clear resolution. So it's better to have some of the questions than all of the answers. The questions need to be lived in a difficult decision. And each of the stops that I've talked to you about and the actions of clarifying, comprehending, committing, choosing, and communicating is developed by answering a core question that can guide you and the people that you're working with to move forward on this road to a good decision. The first step is the answer to what point of view do I bring to this decision. The second step is the dive into importance. What is important to the organization, to me, and to others? And remember that others needs to unpack that stakeholder audience that we talked about earlier. The third question that focuses on priority is what is most important that should guide this decision. So I'm going to stop there for a moment because I have a question that's come in and I want to address it. The question is a facilitator necessary to guide a group through the 5 steps? Well, I've certainly described an example to you where it was very important. It was important for 2 reasons. The level of polarization and emotionality was very high around this decision. None of the members of the board of directors of the nonprofit wanted to serve in a chairing role. They wanted to be able to listen very carefully to the discussion. So a facilitator can manage the emotionality and the difficult behavior if it comes up. It frees up a leader who wants to attend and listen to the decision-making process, not to have to run the meeting, but to be able to really just sit there and listen. I watched these people around the outside of this room. They were taking copious notes. You can't do that and also manage people and interactions. The third thing in this particular room was it's a large enough group that it's usually a very good idea to have a facilitator. If you have a much more manageable, smaller size group of 4 to 6 people, that kind of a group can self-facilitate. But as the group size grows, it can be very useful to have somebody playing this role. So there's another question that's come in, and it really relates also very closely to the example I've given you, which is how do you head off irreconcilable arguments based on values? So the short answer is that there's no foolproof way to do that because sometimes values are in strong tension and even conflict with each other. But what you can always do is 2 things. The first thing is that you can slow the process down because irreconcilable arguments often come with a lot of emotionality. So you can ask people to slow down. You can develop better listening between people on different sides of the argument. You can also help people reflect on where they may have agreement and not just focus on their disagreement. Let me give you an example. There have been a few successful efforts amidst the very contentious political debate in this country on the issue of abortion and abortion rights, where advocates for abortion and a women's right to choose and advocates for ending abortion have come together and cooperated in state legislatures to lobby for various kinds of programs that are in both of their interests. And the way that they were able to do this and bring their combined political influence to bear successfully for things like better adoption procedures and resources for women who are in relationships where they're being battered or they're physically unsafe in some way. The way they've been able to do that is agree to disagree on what they come down on different sides of with their values concerns, and look creatively at where they agree and they may be able to do positive things without only being defined by their disagreements. So those are some ideas about what is a very important question. Let me come back to the fourth question. After the priority question of what is most important that should guide the decision, it's time to find the best fit. Which option is the best fit with your guiding values, these priorities? And then the second part of the question, and what is its downside? To check the downside always before you lock in your decision and make sure that you're really considering the costs and the consequences, and that you can stand in front of anybody who challenges or questions your decision and show them and explain to them about how you accounted for the downside. So the process is not complicated. The last question then, after you've moved through those things, is how can I or we credibly convey the decision to those who need to know? The process is not complicated. It's straightforward. The questions are direct, but it's not so easy. It's not so easy because it requires listening and staying out of debate and always returning to a deeper dialogical exchange. In many groups and organizations, there are deep habits of an orientation towards debate. In order to bring this approach to your collaboration as a leader or change agent, you need to be clear on why it will add value to the leaders involved. So let me speak to that for a brief amount of time. So this motion towards the decision begins to use this method with finding out how you're going to talk to people of influence in the organization and persuade them that an approach like this is going to make a positive difference to the collaboration. And there are 4 reasons that any leader ought to care about why to adopt this kind of an approach to making difficult decisions. The first is that it's protective of the reputation of the organization and the decision maker. It strengthens leadership in the eyes of others. And that confidence that people have in the ethics and the orientation of the people who are leading is fundamental to success. The second thing is it puts something very valuable in the bank. I think of credibility as like money in the bank for people who have to persuade and lead and guide others. It simplifies our communication because people give us the benefit of the doubt because we have credibility. It reduces the need to persuade and influence others when we tell them that this was a decision that was fundamentally important and we're convinced it's the right decision. When you most need it, you gain this benefit of the doubt when you've built credibility in prior decisions. The third is that a decision-making process like this can create more durability in a decision. How does it do that? Decisions are more likely to last when they have the force of authentic, ethical conviction by the people making the decision, more backbone to face resistance and naysayers and people who are not going to like it, more support because that unaligned audience we talk about feels that they're being told the truth, understands the whole story, can explain why to other people who may raise questions, and more acceptance, as I indicated to you in the example I gave you. More acceptance by people who didn't like the decision but recognize it was made in good faith and there's a need to move on. And less reflexive resistance because people don't understand and they're coming up with their own story about why this decision was made. The what were they thinking response. And the fourth is that decisions like this that bring a 360-degree view from different perspectives about what's important, who's going to be touched by this, what matters, what the risks and consequences are far more likely to build a well-thought-through, eyes-open decision. Essentially, this process eliminates blind spots. there's one more reason that goes to the very heart of any collaboration's capacity to fulfill its purpose, why a dialogical, participatory approach like these 5 steps is essential. The decisions that are made are what really telegraph to other people in the community and within the organization or the alliance what we care about. They transmit the ethical norms. The health of a collaborative effort to do your ethical best with the resources you have and the realities you face is animated by decisions that are made and communicated well. You might think of these channels as ethical pathways. In the same way that we know the openness of our arteries is core to our well-being, the openness of decision-making processes is as fundamentally important. When you take action to open up decision-making processes, you clear these arteries so they can carry the life-giving force of the collaborative organization's mission, values, and ethical norms. The stakes are high to keep these channels open in an effective collaboration. So there are compelling reasons to be more intentional and open in your decision-making. To begin, you need to examine your existing or proposed collaboration by looking for the types of decisions that absolutely require this kind of deliberative approach. So let me give you 5 indicators. Some of them will apply in multiple situations, but any of these 5 could be an indicator of the need to slow down, convene the right people, enable a true dialogue, and work towards a deliberate, values-based decision. The first is decisions that represent major forks in the road, like the example that I gave you. If this program was going to be closed, a program that had 20 years of history, a lot of loyalty, and a lot of momentum was going to stop. The organization was going to move down the road, and it was going to really create the path forward. That's a high consequence decision. Anytime you sense that there is concern by stakeholders about the real or perceived impact of a decision, it's time to have this kind of a discussion. When there is a likelihood of controversy, unhappiness, things like rumors and gossip about a decision, then it's important to recognize that you're going to be able to have to tell a good, credible story that includes the kind of dialogue we've been talking about. If it's likely to have effect on morale in the organization, there were no people who actually resigned from this program that I talked about in the organization. People were placed in other programs when the board decided to close the program. But I have seen collaborations where people leave in protest over certain kinds of decisions, or they stay and they continue to create a certain kind of controversy and unhappiness and discontent by talking about the people who made the decision and the way it was made. The last is the possibility of media coverage that could affect or reflect on the reputation of the organization or the leadership. So these are indicators for you as you begin your own journey to think about how to improve your collaboration's decision making. Which decisions do you know about in your organization that would have any one of these indicators present? Habits of conversation and decision making, however, don't just change. You may see the need in decisions, leaders may see the value, but if you want to build a more dynamic, effective collaboration, you need to start a discussion about intentional decision making. Only through this kind of candid discussion about what is and what could be can you really bring the importance of decision making into the foreground. It's critical that leaders model the way in this journey of decision making. I've had people bring me into organizations at the mid-levels to try and bring more openness in decision making. Those initiatives can take hold in an organization, but they will not last, in my experience, unless eventually leaders can be enlisted who believe that these approaches are fundamentally important and they're willing to walk the talk in the way that they make their own decisions, not just talk about how others should use this kind of an approach. I found that leadership often comes initially from the layers below the highest level of executive leadership. So depending on the size and complexity of your collaboration, think about the very top of the organization, a board of directors or an executive director, but also think about operational leaders who lead particular departments and projects, and now think below them at the project and small team level. Any of those levels could benefit from this kind of an approach, as I said, but leaders need to model the way. So I have another question that has come up that I want to answer here. The question is, could you give an example of a shorter application of 5 steps that takes 15 to 30 minutes? And I have a slide that I'm going to show you in just a moment to address that. So let me hold the question for just a moment and get to that slide. So I want to respectfully challenge you to bring this need for better, more effective decision-making to leaders and change agents within your collaboration who share your interest in this approach to facilitate the journey from what is to what could be. Here are some specific things that you can begin to do. The first is really discuss the vision of the organization for its own sense of integrity and ethics. That fundamentally brings you to the question of how important decisions get made, how they're accounted for, and how people account for them also by communicating effectively with those who are going to be touched by the decision. The second thing is that any key decision becomes an opportunity to really show people how we do things by listening to multiple perspectives, by recognizing the importance of including these perspectives and considering them, by effective communication with stakeholders during the decision-making process and certainly when a decision has been made. And that process needs to include honest conversation and leveling and truth-telling about the impacts and the burdens. So with that, then we can begin also to look for examples of courage and initiative within the organization that demonstrate the values of the collaborative in action. And I want to give you an example. I was sitting in the office for a senior management meeting of a large nonprofit healthcare organization that ran a hospital, and they brought in a nurse who had recently on the job put her body between a physician and a patient and blocked the physician from doing something that would have been a life-threatening mistake to the patient. The physician was unaware of something and wanted to act right away. There was a sense of impatience, and this young nurse who had very little seniority refused to let the doctor touch the patient because she was convinced of the jeopardy to the patient. Now that's a very awkward and a difficult thing for a nurse to do with a physician under any circumstances. And here's someone without much experience, but with a very clear sense of right and importance, who took a risk, who could have cost her her job. She was given a standing ovation by the leadership team of the hospital, a special plaque, and a check for living the values of the organization. And that's an example of how when people are willing to speak up and take stands on behalf of what's important, values come into action, and those kinds of actions of courage and initiative in varying ways can be rewarded and acknowledged and supported. That's something that leaders can do. The final thing is that every opportunity to bring somebody new into the organization is an opportunity to talk about the values of the collaboration of the organization and its mission and what that really means. And talk to people, particularly who are being brought in to make decisions, about how they would integrate that into their decision-making and their leadership, what that means to them. That's a conversation from the very beginning that sends a message about this critical dimension of the work of the organization. So now I want to talk about the question of a shorter application of the 5 steps. Every decision in a collaboration that's important faces obstacles that have to be moved to make progress toward mission success. This effort involves leverage. There's an old human principle from the mathematician Archimedes who said, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I will move the world. That leverage is how we move difficulty. We focus our effort and apply it in a particular way. So the decision-making process I've been talking about to you doesn't always need to involve 5 steps. What it does need to do is address the key decision by using what I call a practical and a scalable process. This value is an action process that can be condensed from 5 questions down to 1 question. It's the 3rd question in the 5 steps that I mentioned to you. What is most important here that can guide this decision? So that question, when you have limited time, is the fundamental, what I call the gut check question that you need to focus on with limited time. You need to look at your options in the light of what's most important that should guide you on a principled, values-based path to making this choice. So the fulcrum in Archimedes' language is the values and action process, whether it's 5 steps or 1 step when you have a few minutes. But the guiding values are how we get the leverage. When you know what's truly most important to you and you've put that on a practical, simple process to get different points of view, you have leverage to move even the most difficult decision, like the wrenching decision that I described to you of closing a very important program that served many people for many years, that had strong support in the community and within the organization. So I want to talk to you now a little bit more about the dimensions of time, because it's hard to tackle sometimes the universal challenge of limited time, what I call time disease. We all feel we don't have time, there's not enough time, we're in a hurry, other things are competing for our attention. It's hard to get the attention of leaders on improved decision-making process if they don't see how it can fit within the pressurized time frames they experience. So the 5 steps I've described to you are designed to be implemented in different kinds of time frames. The decision I described in my example was a complex decision. It took weeks to prepare people, get people into the room. There were background papers about different attributes of the program, the budget implications. We had 25 people in a room for 4+ hours to talk it through. The board then convened after the meeting, took their notes, and went away and spent another 2 to 3 hours before they made a decision. That was a complex, high-stakes decision with a tremendous number of stakeholders. It involved millions and millions of dollars in program funding. What I think of as the typical important decision is a full decision, that you can implement the 5 steps in 2 hours, sometimes a little bit less, with a group of 6 to 10 people consulting with and weighing in on a decision. The most typical way that that happens is it's one person's decision, but these other people are consulting and advising the decision maker. But if you need to reach a full consensus with a group of people, it may add more time. But the brief and on-the-fly applications that I've shown you here are also available to you, and I look forward to sending out more information to any of you who are interested after the webinar that will show you exactly how to implement it in smaller time frames. So I want to close by coming to the fundamental takeaway that I hope you will consider. I work with so many good people in good organizations in very different parts of this country and some overseas. And I rarely see people who don't want to do the right thing. I'm working with people who want to do a good thing, who want to do the right thing. And yet, even with that group of people, I see decisions that are often made and communicated so poorly that they result in outcomes that are not so positive. So a good decision-making process like values in action demonstrates integrity to stakeholders. It's not enough to have the integrity and make the decision for the right reasons. How is that integrity going to be shown and demonstrated? So you want the people that you're accountable to and are touched by your decisions to believe that the decision was a good decision. And the way that you do that is by taking the time to develop a complete understanding of the stakeholders and what matters to them, to soundly connect your guiding values to one of the options so that you know you're making it based on principle. And the third thing is to be authentic within the process of reaching a decision, to encourage the honest expression of different points of view, and when a decision is made, to find a way to tell the truth about the decision, about the downside, as well as the benefits and the guiding values. So I hope your path forward will include action to improve decision making. Please consider your next steps. I hope you will take these ideas back to discuss more key decisions and how they're made in our collaboration. I hope you'll take the time to foster a culture of dialogue and inclusion of different points of view when decisions are important. And I hope you'll use something like this 5-step roadmap or your own better version. If you have a different way of doing the same things that I'm talking about as the goals, but the focus needs to always be on stakeholders and their values. So I have another question that's come in, and I want to take questions for the remainder of the webinar. This question is, we're just beginning a collaboration. What is the best way to bring up decision making? How will we make decisions? And make sure that that question is asked of all the right people. And the right people shouldn't just be the people maybe who are at the top, who have the authority, but it includes the likely people who would have opinions and concerns about these decisions. It would be good for leaders to know what the expectations and hopes are of the people that might be lower down in an organizational hierarchy about how decisions are going to be made by the people leading them. How will they be included? How will they be consulted when it's appropriate? And how will they be told so that they stay up to date on the decision? Are there any other questions? Okay. So I remain available to all of you. I am glad to help you with your interest in this important topic in any way that I can. My contact information is here for you. And if any of you are interested in that additional information on brief decision making, please let me know so I can get that to you. And here are a couple of resources. I took the liberty of putting the book that I co-wrote first, because it's this really story of how we developed the 5-step method, my colleague Joan McIver Gibson and I. And it has many examples and illustrations that go beyond what we talked about today that may be helpful for you. The second book is one I think of as really the Bible of this kind of approach. It's the best thing that I've seen on this idea of how to engage participation and dialogue in groups of people. So it's a fine resource, and I think it has many tools and could be very helpful to you. The Center for Nonprofit Excellence has a list of resources on their website that also is available and can be a good way for you to move forward with this. So thank you for your interest. Thank you for the good work that you do in the community. Thank you for being a part of this great work that we all have to build more ways for people to work together to deal with the challenges and needs that are out there in all of our communities. I wish you all the best.